Slatcher just mentioned, today we're going to finish up psychological disorders. I will preface today by apologizing to all of my students who have to hear me twice this week, and especially to my students who have to hear me immediately following this class. Sorry about that. Yeah. All right, so I should mention that I'm a social psychology student with a health concentration. So I'm actually not a clinical student. So if you raise your hand during class, you're really interested in a disorder, I cannot diagnose you. I can talk to you about it and answer any questions that you might have, but just keep that in mind. And also, we'll avoid personal stories. If you have a question, you can just say, like, my friend, but let's avoid personal stories if you can. So today we're going to briefly talk about mood disorders, and then we'll talk about dissociative identity disorder, also known as split personality disorder or multiple personality disorder. We'll talk about schizophrenia, and then we'll wrap things up by talking about a few different personality disorders. Alright, so the mood disorders that we're going to discuss today are major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. And normal individuals experience a range of human emotions from day to day and over a period of several days. But most of the time, people are experiencing a range of emotions, maybe from mild sadness to mild elation. But individuals with mood disorders tend to experience a very wide range of emotions, and they're very extremes, which makes it abnormal. So depressed individuals will experience extreme sadness, and bipolar individuals will experience this extreme sadness. They might experience, they'll have periods of time where they experience normal emotions, and they'll also experience this extreme elation. Alright, so depression. Depression is sometimes referred to as the common cold of mental illnesses, and they're not saying that to minimize the disorder. It is a very serious disorder. They're just saying that because it's extremely common, with a 13% lifetime prevalence in the United States. Depression is more common among women than men, and it often occurs as a response to a loss, maybe the death of a loved one, loss of a job, divorce, things like that. And experiencing some sadness following a traumatic event or a stressful life event is completely normal. It's a normal human emotion in the short term. But if humans are experiencing this extreme sadness for the long term, that's when it becomes a problem. When it becomes really extreme, it's interfering with the person's life. And the depression really just becomes maladaptive, and it's really interfering in their day-to-day life. So, that's cut off. Alright, to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder, you have to meet at least 5 symptoms of depression, and those symptoms have to be present for at least 2 weeks. So you might have a lot of those symptoms, but if you're experiencing those symptoms for like a week and a half, that's not enough to actually be diagnosed. And some signs of depression include persistent sadness or gloom, hopelessness, guilt. The guilt is often irrational, like it's not something that a normal person might feel guilty about, so they just feel a lot of like self-blaming. They also experience feelings of worthlessness. They tend to have decreased energy and changes in eating or sleeping. Sometimes that's accompanied by weight loss or weight gain. And the decreased energy, oftentimes they're experiencing a lot of fatigue. They don't enjoy doing things that they used to do. Sometimes it's hard for them just to do day-to-day activities that they're used to doing, like going to the grocery store. They also have some difficulty concentrating, maybe they're staring off into space, things like that. And when clinicians are sometimes describing depression to someone, if they're trying to describe how a depressed individual sometimes feels, they'll kind of describe it as combining the anguish of grief with the sluggishness of jet lag. Alright, so moving into bipolar disorder. So individuals with bipolar disorder have those depressive symptoms that we just talked about for depression, but bipolar disorder is also accompanied by manic symptoms. So it's, in a nutshell, characterized by extreme mood swings. So they're experiencing extreme highs and extreme lows. And often there are periods of normal moods in between. Sorry about that situation. It looks different on this computer for some reason. There are lots of famous individuals that have bipolar disorder. So you can't really see that, but Mark Twain is one of them, Virginia Woolf, they all had bipolar disorder. We'll talk about why that may have benefited them in some regard in their career. And there's about a 1% prevalence rate for bipolar disorder. So this is actually a really quote by Kaylee Jameson, and she actually has bipolar disorder. And she wrote in her book, "Manic depression distorts moods and thoughts, incites dreadful behaviors, destroys the basis of rational thought, and too often erodes the desire and will to live. It is an illness that is biological in its origins, yet one feels psychological in the experience of it. An illness that is unique in conferring advantage and pleasure, yet one that brings in its weight almost unendurable suffering, and not infrequently suicide." And one other thing that she mentioned in her book is she became addicted to the highs of mania, and she kind of resisted taking her medication because she was so addicted to those feelings of extreme high. And that's not uncommon for people with bipolar disorder. So the lows are really low, and obviously the depression is those are not fun symptoms to experience. But the highs are so high that sometimes bipolar individuals won't want to take their medication because that means their highs might be doubled down. And the manic phase, while it can certainly interfere with a person's life, in the manic phase, people tend to have a ton of energy, they're very productive, and they also have a lot of creativity because they have flights of ideas. So it's not surprising why there have been a lot of famous artists that have had bipolar disorder, because they get a lot done and they're sometimes the most creative while they're in this manic state. So bipolar disorder, like all the disorders that we're going to talk about today, is very serious. Approximately 1 in 5 individuals with bipolar disorder will die from committing suicide. It's also highly terrible. So there's a 70% concordance rate for identical twins, 20% for fraternal twins. And we're going to watch a video on bipolar disorder. So this is a woman named Megan. She has bipolar disorder, and we'll just watch maybe like the first 5 minutes, and you can hear her experiences with her manic symptoms and her depressive symptoms.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Bipolar Health video series. Today we're going to watch an interview with Megan, a 25-year-old grad student with bipolar disorder. This interview lasts approximately 9 minutes. In your own words, can you tell me what it's like when you're manic?
When I'm full manic, I've had one bad manic episode, and prior to that, I had approximately 3 months of hypomania. And during that 3 months, I was very productive. I felt like I could accomplish anything. I was on the phone 24/7. I was doing 5 things at once at work. I accomplished a lot at my job, which was good. I was just everything got taken care of. I did things with my car. I got all my Christmas shopping done like 3 weeks before Christmas, which has never happened in my life. But then it started to get worse and worse. And eventually I got to the point where I was sleeping an hour to 2 hours a night, and I found nothing wrong with me. I had no appetite, and I started eventually to get delusional to the point that I was seeing what was around me, but I was perceiving it completely differently from the way it really was. And I would be in situations where I was safe and I would feel very threatened. I would be in situations that were less safe and I would feel safe. Eventually it got to the point where I just had a complete breakdown, and I just couldn't understand the situation that I was in. I couldn't figure out how to handle it. I couldn't figure out what to do, and I ended up in the emergency room. Basically, as I just described, I get everything that I need to get accomplished. It doesn't matter if I sleep 4 hours, if I sleep 7 hours. When I'm hypomanic, I just continually go. It's a little bit like the Energizer Bunny, and I go until things are done. Hypomania has its uses because you tend to be a little bit more social. You tend to be a little bit more outgoing when you're hypomanic. A good story about me being hypomanic is college orientation. I was incredibly hypomanic, and I met every single person by name in my orientation group. I threw this huge party on the second night of orientation. I got this, somebody who was older to go and buy us drinks and everything, and it was a good time. I made a lot of friends. I still have some friends from orientation, which is really unusual. But looking back, I slept probably about 5 hours throughout the 3 days of orientation, and it was very hypomanic.
What's it like for you when you are depressed?
I haven't had as much experience with depression since I've been diagnosed with bipolar. When I was first diagnosed with bipolar, I went through, and they were trying to get my medications right, I went through probably about 3 months of depression, but it was almost more of an apathy than a depression. There were days where I would feel depressed and I would feel pretty worthless and I would cry a lot. At the time I was engaged and I was living with my parents and my fiance was here in Buffalo, and I would feel like our relationship was ending. I would feel like I was a burden to my parents. But for me, depression is very internal. It's how I feel about myself. And since they got my medications right, I've been fortunate enough that it hasn't been as much of an issue.
How can you
So as you can see with Megan in that video, she had increased energy, she wanted to plan parties, things like that. She also had restlessness. I think she mentioned that she only slept about 5 hours for a period of 3 days. So in the manic stages, they have this decreased need for sleep. They are experiencing this excessively high, euphoric mood, just extreme elation. They also have sometimes like a flight of ideas. They feel like they can accomplish anything if they put their mind to it. And sometimes they have unrealistic beliefs in their abilities and powers. Sometimes they'll go on spending sprees. They might have an increased sexual drive. Sometimes they might increase use of drugs, alcohol, sleeping medications because they have this decreased need for sleep. And sometimes they might be a bit irritable and to the point where maybe they'll demonstrate some aggressive behavior. Oftentimes they'll deny that anything is wrong, and it's probably in the manic phase where bipolar individuals are resistant to taking their medications. Because if you're experiencing that extreme elation, why do you want to take a medication that's going to kind of bring you down a little bit? Or at least that's what I'm imagining is the mindset. Very interesting, I had a friend in college who was bipolar, and I talked to him when he was in his depressed state, and he was talking to me, and he was experiencing extreme grief for really no apparent reason. He just seemed very down. And then when he was in his manic phase, he started using a lot of drugs, he was partying all the time. He actually ended up getting kicked out of school. And while still in this manic phase, he took it as a positive thing and decided that he was going to write a book. And within a very short period of time, I think within a month, he had written several hundred pages for a book that he was planning to write. And then when he got back into his depressive stage, he kind of stopped working on the book. So like we mentioned before, a lot of very productive people can get a lot of things done while in this manic stage because they have all of this energy, they feel like they can really accomplish anything, and they also have